Okay, so my name is Karen Haynes, and the mass media that I was investigating was an article on the emerging use of AI in psychotherapy. And this mass media article relied upon the research that was conducted by a number of individuals at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles. And I have a list here of all the individuals. I won't go through and read them all because there are probably, let me see, like 12 or 13 different individuals that conducted this research. And the aim of this research was to answer the question, is an AI-enabled conversational agent in a virtual reality environment feasible and usable for self-administered mental health support, specifically in this case, for individuals with alcohol-related cirrhosis of the liver? So this sample size that they had was 20 participants, and they were all diagnosed with alcohol-related cirrhosis. The population that they pulled from were 45% non-Hispanic white, 35% Hispanic, and 20% belonging to other racial groups. The methodology used in the original research was that AI-trained avatars in virtual reality settings were providing 30-minute sessions of either motivational interviewing or cognitive behavioral therapy sessions to these 20 participants. And the way that they measured outcomes was with the GAD-7, the PHQ-9, and it's audit, it's specific to alcohol use. And then they also did an additional rating of IUS for usability. And then finally, they did some semi-structured interviews to develop a qualitative perspective on how the clients and participants experienced these sessions. The conclusions that were found from the original research were that AI-driven virtual reality was feasible and usable, and participants provided positive feedback, and they also felt that the sessions were more free of bias because of the virtual reality dynamic. There wasn't this human component where bias is being brought into the circumstances. And so there's the conclusion also is that it may be a viable self-administered mental health tool, even though they did find positive results in this particular study. The limitations include that, it's a small sample size. They need more data. They need long-term follow-up. They need a more diverse sample in order to fully determine viability. And these are the references. This is the original article and the mass media article, excuse me. And then this is the research article. And jumping over to the mass media. And so what they're really looking at, the claim that was being made is that AI is an effective tool for psychotherapy. So this particular article was really sending that message that it is an effective tool and that patients, they were specific, they did specify alcohol addictions because they did quote the original research. So they weren't just saying like generalizing that it was effective for everyone. So they were accurate in really narrowing down that this is a specific population that was investigated for this particular research. So patients with alcohol addiction reported positive feedback about VR, AI avatars, and trained in MI and CBT, including, and then this freedom of bias, right? So for the most part, they captured the key findings of the original research, but in the article, they really oversimplified some important details. They mentioned the sample size, but they didn't include any of the demographic information that was included in the original study. They really only briefly mentioned the use of VR and AI-driven avatars, but they didn't really explain any of the specific scales that were used to measure outcomes or any of the other methods used, such as the interviews. So the article also omitted any limitations that were presented in the original study, such as the challenges faced by new VR users, and then lack of long-term data. So overall, while the mass media article highlighted the core findings, it really lacked detail, and it kind of felt like the reader was a little bit uninformed. They didn't really have a full perspective of what was actually going on when it comes to whether or not AI is an effective tool for psychotherapy. Some of the implications that can be drawn from this research are that well, first of all, I want to start this with the caveat that my populations of interest are to be working with individuals that are affected by incarceration, homelessness, sex trafficking, and the child welfare system. So through that lens, it really isn't accessible. It's accessible, excuse me, and it's non-judgmental. However, these individuals may face some additional economic barriers, some technology barriers. They may not be experienced with virtual reality. Like I'll tell you, I'm not in any of these circumstances at the moment, and I don't have VR goggles. So it's one of those things where it's like, okay, this is an emerging field. And it would it's going to take a lot of effort to be able to make these things available for clients, especially my populations of interest. And another thing to be thinking about is that there's this lack of human connection that might disadvantage some individuals who need that interpersonal support, especially for individuals who are coming from a chemical dependency background or people who are they need to be working towards rebuilding these social relationships that have been damaged or just learning how to interact with people in the community on a new level. And this virtual reality AI-driven interface may not be providing them with some of those vital skills they're working towards developing. So I'm starting to go over time. So I just want to thank you guys for being a part of my research study. And if you'd like, I can be available to answer a couple of questions.
Yeah, I was wondering for your research. So I guess like the implication piece of it, is very geared towards the research study. I guess like in comparison to the media article that you did read
Mm.
as well, what are the implications on like the oversimplifications of it?
So, that's a really good point. Thank you for pointing that out. Yes, I did kind of miss that on my slide right now. So some of the implications are that a lot of times people in the mass media, they're working towards like getting a story. They want to get a reaction to get readers. And while I believe that there is this motive of wanting to disseminate some vital information, the fact that they're leaving out this diversity, the information regarding diversity, what it's doing is it's really limiting the reader from fully grasping the actual picture of what's happening, of what this research has concluded. So it's giving you like a period, like AI is an effective tool for psychotherapy, and it's almost like this presumption that it's good for everyone. But really, when we look at the sample and the breakdown of the people who are actually involved in the sample, like, is it providing like 20% belonging to other racial groups? That doesn't, to me, that does not demonstrate like whether or not it's going to be effective, especially with a sample size of 20. So that means there were 4 people from other racial groups besides white and Hispanic. So there's a lot of limitations there, and when that's not provided to the reader, it can skew perspectives. So it's one of those things where we really have to be paying attention to. This is why it's so important that we work towards finding scholarly work. But I mean, and we can use these mass media articles as like backup for scholarly work if if we're having a difficult time finding that gap, filling that gap in the research. But really, we should be starting first with scholarly work, peer-reviewed work, if we're going to be conducting any research and wanting to do like literature reviews, such as that. So I don't know if we want to have another question, but I am definitely running over time and I don't want to take all the time. Maria, did you have a question?
We're ready.
Hi everyone, my name is Maria, and I did my mass media on the COVID mental health and schools our kids are suffering, and it's not all right from Fox News. The original piece that Fox News used for their article was done from the CDC, and the article's name is Firearms Homicide and Suicide Rate through 2019 through 2020 during the COVID pandemic. So the research used information from all populations in the US, and the way that they did it was through the national vital statistics and the population data with urbanization and poverty measures at the county level. So it was very specific and it took in a lot of factors such as race, poverty levels. And the results was that during 2019 to 2020, the gun firearms related homicides and suicides increased by 35% since 1994. And so there were differences between certain populations, subgroups, and differences in age levels as well. And so for them, a lot of the reasons why the increase happened during this time was not only because of COVID, but there was underlying factors such as economic, physical, and social conditions. Um, but when we switch over to the mass media article that Fox News did, the only thing that they used was the 35%. They used that, they didn't cite it, they didn't really expand on this article at all. And so for them, they used it to claim that because um, COVID restrictions happened, an increase of mental health symptoms happened during this time, which led to gun-related homicides and suicides happening among adolescents. And so they used it to kind of move forward the idea that mental health services don't really work, that the only way to really secure the safety of our children is through physical forms, such as more like physical barriers, such as like metal detectors that we kind of see like at concerts. For them, that was their like main push. And so um, the article that the CDC created explicitly stated that there were alternatives, such as more community-based activities and um, different types of systemically uh, s- I'm sorry. There's a lot of alternatives that are evidence-based that approach the factors that really reduce violence for gun-related homicides and suicides that are perpetuated by factors that um, really come into like the main root of gun violence. I'm not sure if I explained that correctly, but um, it offered these alternative options that the article that Fox News made did not at all um, m- made their viewers aware. And so for them, they only pushed one solution into decreasing gun violence. And so I felt like it was a total misrepresentation of what the CDC found. And they only took one snippet that really reinforced their idea of what was happening during the pandemic um, and how the gun violence, especially it was written during a time where a mass shooting was happening. And so it kind of like all correlated into like this is the only way we can protect our kids. And I just felt like they didn't do justice to their viewers by really presenting everything that the article that they used had to offer. Um, and I think that would be it for me. If you guys have any questions.
I have a question. So when you were reading this article, did you kind of get the sense that there was some political motivation behind it?
Yes, definitely. And I think that the writer was a doctor. I feel like that also pushed the narrative of like, I know what's right for the children, and because it's considered right-wing media, which is very pro-gun kind of thing. And so it really alluded to that being the only solution to
Mm,
arm families in order to protect them as the only solution.
And like invalidating other means of keeping the community safe, such as, providing some mental health support or, eliminating some of the stressors in the lives of our youth so that they're not turning towards these activities that are high risk.
Yeah,
Um, yeah,
definitely. I
yeah.
think they kind of omitted that information that kind of informing their viewers of what are the underlying roots of this violence, and they're just really going surface level. And so they don't really get to know what are other factors that are also bringing up this type of violence.
And it just kind of like touches upon, I don't want to generalize all right wing type of, perspectives, but it does kind of feel, or I get the sense that it's in the same vein of steering away from investing a lot in the community, like, and putting a lot of investment in community-based services and spending money, big government, right? Like they want the government to be very small. So like it's a lot cheaper to install metal detectors everywhere versus providing like these, these restructuring activities for the entire community and the entire population to try and like resolve the issue. Cause I mean, I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a totally accurate, based on the article, how it was written, and based on the information that the actual research was claiming. And so I feel like it put the families like very in a form of very individualistic of thinking like what's good for your family instead of what's good for the community as a whole. And so I feel like it kind of emboldened families to kind of think for themselves rather than what could be beneficial for everyone.
Hmm, thank you. Good job. That's awesome. Yeah.
I was also just going to mention something about like kind of the systemic aspect of it, but I think Karen's question kind of answered mine as well. Yeah, okay.
Okay. So for this research poster about mass media myths, my topic was about Facebook influences. There were around 9 authors on this original research, and the claim was that passive Facebook use erodes affect well-being, while active use does not have the same impact. So pretty much this study really focused in on the differences between active and passive use, and it was supported by experimental and longitudinal evidence. So there's two parts to this study, and as defined, the passive usage of Facebook would have been without any interaction, so just scrolling, and active usage is just direct communication, interactions on the interface. And so in this original research, the sample included undergraduate students, specifically 84, and then more than half of them were female identifying, and the mean age for these undergrad students was 20 years old, and most of like and 79% of them were European American. So um, that this was in both studies for the longitudinal and experimental research. So there is some limitations based on this sample in itself, that for generalizability, just because of the sample of just like undergrad students and the 79% of European Americans, that it's very limited in its population. For methodologies, they use two experiments, like I said. So in the first part of the experiment, they gave each participant 10 minutes to use Facebook either actively or passively in a controlled environment with a person in the room or outside of the room, I believe, but it was still a controlled environment and in the field. So this would have been the longitudinal part of it. They sent participant text messages throughout the day, around 5 to 6, but definitely a text message in the morning and definitely one at the end of the day. And this text message included telling the participant to kind of um, jot down their emotions in the moment. So either their affect, loneliness, life satisfaction level, and also their Facebook usage pattern at the time. So whether they used it right before the check-in, right after the text check-in, and for how long, stuff around that. So all of this data was gathered, and so the conclusion from this data would have been, it was that passive Facebook usage had a negative effect on well-being overall, and that negative well-being was kind of the motivator for it was kind of the aspect of envy. And throughout the day, um, individuals who were passively using Facebook, at the end of the day, their results were that they were less happy. They had more envy, and this became a pattern in itself. And then, so with active users, throughout the day, if they were actively using Facebook, they had less envy, and there was no pattern of well-being being declined at all. So overall, individuals had a stable mood throughout the day. So a big part of this conclusion is just kind of understanding the aspect of um, how envy is kind of a motivator, but it wasn't the main part of the study either. But that was just a pattern that they noticed. And so yeah, in the longitudinal study, they were able to look at how offline interactions also increased well-being as well to counteract some of the passive or active use on media. Or yeah, Facebook. And so also in the other article that I was reading, it was that um, it was a article on kind of Vox, I believe. And so this media was claiming that Facebook in itself was just bad for society and individuals overall. The usage impact well-being, um, and they define well-being as mental health as a whole, like in a very generalized sense, causing addiction, social division, shallow interactions with communication, misinformation, all of these kind of concerns that they kind of took out from the original research is overly simplified. So it didn't really capture the original claim at all. All of these things were through kind of the business model lens of like how it affects society and individuals, and how kind of Facebook as an interface is something that should be gotten rid of as a whole. Um, Even though it's not that direct, that it's a cause and effect, that media causes less well-being. So overall, the implications of the study would be kind of really distinguishing the differences between active and passive use of social media, and also between the media claim and the original research binary terms of kind of phrasing media as good or bad overall is an implication for individuals using media. So that could be just the rhetoric around it, that media is good and bad, and that could lead to kind of catastrophizing media usage as a whole. And people might go really far to the left or right to say that they're not going to use it at all, or they're like, it's not a problem at all, by the way that they use it. And like I mentioned, there's the mechanism of envy that probably would need to be studied more about, and just the demographics would need to be um, generalized, or not generalized a little more, but also just that they use different populations to continue to replicate the study for it to be more accurate too. But yeah, if you guys have any questions at all.
Do you feel like the rhetoric, if it was changed, it would be more, I don't know if the word is accepting by, let's say, teenagers who were to read this article instead of it being like binary? Do you think if it included other types of rhetoric, do you think they would be more open to retrieving this information or from this research?
Yeah, I think so. I think using binary words I think I use rhetoric as kind of the phrase for it, just because like I think media right now is something that's very controversial in the way that it's used. There's new tech coming out, so there's a lot of just different parts of it. So like maybe using less binary words might give an open-ended part to like the reader to kind of interpret their own information. So definitely it would have helped if more of the original research was included in it. Yeah. Um, yeah.
I have a question. What do you think some of the motives might be behind like misrepresenting this, the data that's being found? And do you get the sense that this research was used, not necessarily like as, um, in order to represent the truth of what findings are, but like to bolster an opinion that was already like formed before the article was already written, right? Like I don't, it almost seems like they didn't conduct research and then write an article about what's going on. It feels like they already like had a conclusion they wanted to draw, and then they just selected research that would back that. I know
Definitely, yeah.
it's stacked questions, but I think about both of them.
Yeah, so pretty much I think kind of the motive behind it was definitely to just say that Facebook, and it didn't mention other media, which limits the applicability as well. So like with Facebook specifically, they were just,
Mm.
I don't know, maybe they had something against Facebook usage in itself. The interfaces are pretty similar with like Instagram, maybe since it's under the same owner. So like I don't know if it was just a different motive around that, or maybe they just have some. The person who was writing this, they just had an opinion that they didn't think that their well-being was good around it. It could be just personal experience, but then also the second part of that question is slowly drifting out of my mind, but I was gonna say that like the research, the references in this article, there was multiple references included. Only like maybe one or two was actually like peer-reviewed sources. The other ones were just kind of other articles, and they kind of only put like one to two quotes from this original research, and just like this whole article was just a bunch of quotes from different articles really trying to support that one point. But yeah,
Almost like cherry picking.
yeah, definitely.